Good afternoon. Welcome to Tuesday Talks. My name is Judy Zorn. I'm the Executive Director of the Great Lakes Chamber Orchestra, and my guest today is Great Lakes Chamber Orchestra musician, violinist, Anne Marie Jones. Anne Marie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Judy.
You're very, very welcome. It is exciting for our audience to get kind of a little closer peek, if you will, at musicians that they feel very close to because they see you on stage at pretty well every performance, and you have to know that we in the audience feel like we know you, but
Oh,
but really, we don't, in the sense of the whole person. So that's kind of what we try to do here in the few minutes that we chat together. So again, thank you for being here. I know that you started playing violin at a young age and that you grew up in mid Michigan, and you come from a musical family, mom and dad. So maybe you could just share a little bit more about all of that with us.
sure. So my parents were both church musicians. So I was born into a musical family, probably that goes back generations. But my mother was a church organist and my dad was the choir director. And so I think some of my earliest memories of music were standing much to my father's chagrin, might I add, but standing on the pew with my grandmother conducting the church choir along with him when I was probably about 3 years old. So when I was 9 years old,
Him, as they say.
I was probably showing him up. I don't know. I
Right.
didn't mean to. Well, when I was about 9 years old, I finally was able to start learning how to play the violin. I had heard someone play, I think maybe on the radio, and oh, what a magical sound! And what is that instrument, Mom? And so finally, they started giving me private violin lessons. And I carried that on all the way through school. And obviously, here we are now.
Right. And so I know you did your undergraduate work at Michigan State, and you were a music performance major, but then that changed a little bit, didn't it?
Yeah, so I started off my undergraduate program at MSU as a performance major. And probably within the first year or so, I was realizing just how much time alone in a practice room that required. And I'm such a people person. I love engaging with others. I knew that I needed to make a change because I didn't want my life to be so lonely. So I started teaching there at the community music school in my second year at MSU and loved working with the students and talking with the other teachers about teaching, and decided to shift into an education degree. So it took me a little bit longer to finish my undergrad because of that, but I'm really grateful that I made the pivot.
And so then from MSU, where was your first teaching position?
So I moved around probably, I don't know, maybe it was too much, but I started off, I wanted an adventure. I wanted to get out of Michigan. So I took a teaching position doing orchestra. I think it was like fourth through 12th grade orchestra in this tiny little town in Western New York, of all places, called Wellsville. So if anyone has heard of Wellsville, it's this beautiful little town. Um, and I traveled between, two different buildings every day to teach, and it was a lot of fun, but I felt really far away from home. So I've also taught orchestra in Greenville, Michigan, and in Traverse City, where I finished my last public school teaching position.
Sure, you were in Traverse City, the West Senior High, is it called? I thought
Yes,
for a number of
yes.
years, weren't you?
I taught there for 7 years.
That was quite an active program, wasn't it?
Oh my gosh, it was like being on a treadmill. It was wonderful. It's a high performing program. So I was in charge of the West Senior High Orchestras for about 7 years. And boy, I just had to buckle up and figure out how to do something in such a high paced music environment. It was wonderful. The students were all wonderful. But in 2017, I realized that for my life to sustain it and feel, I think, joyful, I needed to I needed to find greater work-life balance. There was definitely too much of the working and not enough of other things.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about you're getting your music education degree, and now all of a sudden you're in charge of school orchestras, which means you're conducting. And how do you put all of that together from, all the different
Mhm.
instruments that you're teaching or conducting a larger ensemble?
Yes, my gosh, I when I was thinking about our talk today, I thought, boy, I've really pivoted quite a lot in my life so far to sort of navigate who I am as a person and put that together with what I was doing in the world. And um, when I first started out as an educator, I was really involved with younger students in a Suzuki environment,
Mhm.
and
Yes.
loved that nurturing of the young ones. And then I found myself working with the high schoolers in a very high performing environment, and I thought, okay, it's time to develop my skills as a conductor. And I was very fortunate to have a wonderful mentor in that program, Pat Brumbaugh. She was the band director at West at the time that I started teaching there. And she said, Anne Marie, all of your Suzuki training is wonderful and it's helpful, but you need to improve your skills as a conductor. So I was able to attend a few conducting symposiums where I would gain a greater understanding of how to work with a large ensemble. And then also, because I was a performing musician at the same time, I'm sitting on the other side of the podium from the conductor, right? So in rehearsals, I would watch what the conductor was doing, both in Traverse City and here at the Great Lakes Chamber Orchestra. And I would pick up little tips and tricks. And then I'd go back to my own classroom and try them out on my students and see, what was working, what could I do, what felt like it fit with me in my own toolbox.
Yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? Yeah. So I know that probably fairly recently, within the last year or so, you've moved to Petoskey, and that's a move from Traverse City, certainly. And
Mhm.
but you've been performing with the Great Lakes Chamber Orchestra now. I think that you mentioned you started when Matt Hazelwood was directing the orchestra, and off and on through these years, you've been playing with GLCO. But the really fun thing that I know that you've enjoyed so much is you were one of the musicians that went on the European tour several years ago. So tell us, how exciting was that?
That was a trip of a lifetime, Judy. I mean, I'm sure you remember just how breathtaking that opportunity was. So the Paul Sonner, our concertmaster, had approached me because he knew of my abilities as a conductor and being a musician, as being a performing violinist as well. And the orchestra needed someone to conduct one of the pieces that was on that European tour, and asked if I would be able to join the orchestra on this tour. And, you know, as a as a musician, that any opportunity to visit Europe and to conduct in Europe, oh my gosh, like I had to jump at the chance. So it was it was wonderful to spend those days in beautiful locations in Europe with close friends who, are musicians I've performed with for so many years, and to be a part of an incredible, oh my gosh, it just, I think that everyone that was on that trip, whenever we see each other, that trip is mentioned, and it was a highlight of my life for sure.
Well, I know the group has had several reunions subsequent to the trip, and board members and GLCO friends and supporters who went on the trip just have, as you said, it was the trip of a lifetime. And I hear always only such good things about that trip. So I'm so glad that you could be part of that and then have that kind of once in a lifetime experience of conducting members of the orchestra over there. So that's really fun. I know now that you've moved to Petoskey, your studio teaching, well, you're still doing some studio teaching online, aren't you?
once we shut down in March and everyone knew that we had to, stay at home, um, I thought, well, let's see if my students want to continue lessons virtually. I've never done it, but let's see what can be done. And luckily, most of my students were agreeable to that and actually wanted to continue because, when all of a sudden we're in a pandemic, so many other aspects of life had been shut down. And honestly, kids were just bored. Can we please continue to play? So I'm now teaching all of my private students through FaceTime and Zoom, which is an entirely new experience for all of us. But, it has its pluses and minuses. On the one hand, parents don't need to drive clear across town.
Right.
We can set our 30-minute appointment and boom, there you have it.
Right.
But on the other hand, there are some things that just can't be translated through technology. So I think that we're all doing the best that we can to navigate, and we're seeing the benefits and we're seeing the things that we don't like as well, and trying to envision what's going to come next.
Right. Oh, isn't that the truth? What's going to come next? I think as a private teacher, having had the ability to have you in person as my teacher, for instance, would certainly be an advantage taking it now to an online setting. So, oh,
Mhm.
yeah, I know what she means. Okay, I know what this means. And so I think that that is certainly a very helpful thing. You know, Anne Marie, I would like our audience to know that there is something else pretty extraordinary about you, and that you have had an opportunity to take some instruction in life coaching, in integral coaching. And I think it would be wonderful if you could just share a little bit about that and what you're doing now with our viewing audience.
Sure. So when I decided to pivot away from my public school teaching position, it was in part because I knew that there's something about me that's a good listener, and that people that my students and friends and family that I talk with often comment that they feel so safe around me. So I thought, okay, well, what is this next chapter of my life going to look like? What is that? And I'll have to tell you, when I first was introduced to the concept of life coaching, I thought it was kind of a bunch of baloney. And I wasn't at all thinking that that was the direction I was going to go. But as I explored what it really was to, coach someone in a supported relationship, for them to be able to explore all of who they are and what challenges they're sitting with, and then be able to come up with their own path forward. I thought that's really intriguing to me. So I started exploring the profession of coaching, and found a program in San Francisco that was an integral model. And for those of us that aren't familiar with integral, it means that it's integrated. So this method that I'm now trained in, uh, we help people develop their somatic awareness of their own bodies, their emotional capacity, their ability to really work with their emotions effectively, and bring it all together with what's happening cognitively. So we help people to integrate all of these parts of themselves to be more effective in their professional and personal lives.
Well, that sounds very exciting, and I'm so happy for you that that is working out. And I know that that's a bit of a journey for you, and as you begin to expand, explore, and
Mhm.
that profession, if you will. I have to say, though, that I am very glad that you are continuing the violin and performing. Of course, you do, and you have to. It's part of who you are, and you can never take that away from you. And we're thrilled that you are a member of the Great Lakes Chamber Orchestra. And I know I speak for the audience when I say that now, when we see you on stage, we will feel just that much closer to you, as though we know you better as a friend. And because we've all so enjoyed listening to you perform with the orchestra.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. So I think that we are closing our discussion here now. And as you touched on, these are interesting times. Certainly, we are still in the middle of COVID. We're looking for doing some live performance in the spring with the orchestra. And of course, we'll have to see what happens.
Mhm.
Like I said, we're thrilled that you are part of the orchestra.
I'm thrilled to be a part of the orchestra. I believe that what the Great Lakes Chamber Orchestra is creating is a beautiful aspect to Northern Michigan. The community that we have of musicians and audience members of really the whole Great Lakes Chamber Orchestra community is really special and something to continue to nurture.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank all of you for joining us again this week on Tuesday Talks and our chat with Anne Marie Jones, violinist of Great Lakes Chamber Orchestra. I wish you all well, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.